Portland Police Bureau. I want to protect people against bad things. I want to make the world a better place. I was sworn in with the police in 1961 in April. It was a different world then, in some ways better, some ways a lot worse than today. I'd been with the Bureau about 15 years in 1975, and I was burnt out. The job's impossible and traumatic, and no matter how you look at it, anyone who knows anything about law enforcement knows this. Police are damned if they do, and damned if they don't. And that aspect of police work will never change. I finally said no to my career with the police and resigned in early April of 1978. Not because I was in trouble or pressured to resign. I left of my own free will because I couldn't fight a corrupt bureau and corrupt system, and I was tired and my health was poorly affected. I have never regretted leaving, and I'm alive today because I left. But before I left, one big part of why I left occurred September 5, 1975. On that day, I was called to what dispatch described as a possible suicide on Northeast Hancock Street. When I arrived, I was directed up a narrow staircase into the bedroom of a very old, skinny house. 3 uniformed officers were standing around a narrow, single bed. On the bed was a black teenager lying on his back as if he was asleep. His eyes were shut, but there was a bullet hole in his forehead with a stippling and contact burns that indicates a point-blank shot. When the barrel of the gun is pressed right up against the victim. His arms were folded across his chest, and a sawed-off rifle was lying over and on top of his arms. It looked like it had been awkwardly placed there. I dismissed the officers to clear the crime scene and begin my own investigation. I knew immediately that this young boy, whose name I learned later was Zebedee Manning, had not committed suicide. This child had been murdered. The rifle was too long for his arms to use as a weapon to commit suicide. And even a rookie cop knows people don't shoot themselves in the head, lie back down on the bed, shut their eyes, then fold their arms over their chest, with a gun lying over on top of their arms. Whoever murdered Zebedee Manning staged the scene in a very clumsy attempt to make it look like a suicide, when in fact it was murder. While I waited for ID officers to arrive and photograph and fingerprint the scene, I searched the room. The dresser drawers contained a small baggie of weed and the titles to 4 different cars. I knew that car titles were often used as collateral to hold pending drug purchases. I was later to learn that drug dealer and notorious pimp Henry Johnson had used his nephew by marriage, Zebedee, to sell and store heroin for him. When the body was removed, I examined the rest of the house. In the kitchen was a half-full bottle of whiskey and 4 glasses on a kitchen table. Several people had been drinking before the murder. When I was able to speak to Zebedee's distraught mother, Anna Mae Miller, she assured me that her son did not drink, and she didn't allow alcohol in the house. So how did it get here? I wrote my investigative report indicating I believed the boy had been murdered in some kind of a drug deal gone bad. Secretly, I suspected that this young boy's death was a result of dirty cops from the narcotics squad, which would later be confirmed by several other sources. I sent copies of my report to my supervisor in the homicide detail. The next day, I was astounded when my immediate boss, Lieutenant Rob Akeley, told me to drop the investigation. He said, and I will never forget, he was just another dope dealer. Go to work on something else. The call had come out as a possible suicide, and so be it. No one in homicide cared if this boy was only 15 when he was murdered. Zebedee Manning's name was erased from the chalkboard of pending cases, and I was told I could no longer investigate his murder. Why was my boss tossing this murder out the window? Who or what was he protecting? Quietly, I continued investigating the case on my own time and on my own days off for several months, which got me into trouble. Lieutenant Rob Akeley and Captain Ron Still decided to kick me out of homicide, where I'd been doing well, and put me back into burglary detail as punishment. But I continued to talk to Anna Mae numerous times. Eventually, she told me she had found a large baggie of heroin hidden in the wall space behind Zebedee's bed, and that in her fear, she had flushed the heroin down the toilet. No one seemed to care about a young black boy whose life was ended before it even begun. But I knew Zebedee was murdered by who I believe were corrupt drug cops. Before Zebedee could have chosen a different path, his life was ended over nothing, for a few $1,000s worth of street heroin. Murder accomplishes nothing. That's why we're here. It leaves families destroyed and loved ones abandoned, alone, without support. I've seen the heartache that murder causes, and so have you. We are here today to say no. No. No to murder. And remember those who were murdered. Zebedee Manning, say his name. Zebedee Manning, say his name.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate that, man. Now, an interesting side note to this story and this guy. Right. Let me move over here. Scared myself. I have 3 of Zebedee's nieces on the phone right now, watching this on Facebook Live from Louisiana and Texas. I spoke to another niece who couldn't make it today because she had